Welcome to the channel where everyday pocket change turns into extraordinary stories of hidden fortune. And today we are diving into one of the most shocking and fascinating tales in American coin history, the legendary 1946 wheat penny that has stunned collectors and ignited imaginations around the world with whispers of values reaching an unbelievable $95 million. A coin that at first glance looks ordinary yet carries within it a perfect storm of history, minting chaos, post-war transitions, and microscopic mistakes that can transform a single cent into a life-changing treasure. So settle in as we explore how a simple copper penny from the mid-20th century could become one of the most valuable coins ever imagined, and why collectors still search their change in hopes of finding one. The year 1946 sits at a unique crossroads in United States history, just after World War II, when the nation was shifting from wartime production back to peacetime normalcy, and the mints were under enormous pressure to produce vast quantities of coins for a booming economy while simultaneously dealing with worn equipment, rushed schedules, and leftover materials from earlier years. And it is precisely this environment that creates the possibility for extraordinary errors, because when speed, volume, and aging machinery collide, perfection becomes nearly impossible and mistakes slip through unnoticed, sometimes in quantities so small that only one or two examples are ever discovered. The 1946 wheat penny was struck at a time when the Lincoln wheat reverse design was nearing the end of its era, making these coins part of a historically significant final chapter, and collectors place immense importance on transitional years because they often produce unusual variations, experimental dies, and subtle differences that later become legendary. One of the most talked about possibilities surrounding the $95 million valuation is the presence of extreme mint errors such as dramatic off-metal strikes, wrong-planchet compositions, or transitional alloy anomalies that should not exist according to official records. And when a coin contradicts what history says should be possible, its desirability skyrockets beyond conventional price guides. Imagine a 1946 wheat penny struck not on the standard bronze planchet, but on a leftover wartime steel blank or an experimental alloy that was never meant for circulation, creating a piece that defies expectations and instantly becomes a once-in-a-lifetime discovery, because rarity at that level is not measured in hundreds or thousands, but potentially in a single surviving example. Another powerful driver of value is the presence of doubled dies, particularly dramatic hub doubling that affects the date, the lettering of liberty, or the motto "In God We Trust," because these are not post-mint damage but genuine mistakes created during the die-making process, and when doubling is strong, crisp, and clearly visible under magnification, collectors recognize it as an authentic error that cannot be replicated, and the more dramatic and clean the doubling, the higher the demand. Among specialists who compete fiercely for the finest known specimens, the 1946 wheat penny is also rumored to exist with extreme die clashes, where the obverse and reverse dies struck each other without a planchet in between, transferring ghost-like impressions of the wheat ears onto Lincoln's portrait or vice versa, creating surreal designs that look almost artistic, and when combined with other errors such as rotation or misalignment, the coin becomes a showcase of minting chaos frozen in copper. Another astonishing possibility involves major off-center strikes where the coin is struck so far from center that parts of the design are missing, while others are stretched and distorted, yet still retaining a visible date and mint mark, a combination that is incredibly rare and highly prized because it shows both the date and the magnitude of the error in a single piece. Then there are broad strikes, where the retaining collar fails and the coin expands outward during the strike, producing a wider than normal penny with a distorted rim and weakened details. And while broad strikes alone can be valuable, when paired with additional anomalies like doubled dies or unusual metal composition, they can reach astronomical levels of desirability. The $95 million legend also draws fuel from the idea of mule errors, coins struck using mismatched dies intended for different denominations or designs, and while confirmed mule pennies from this era are extraordinarily rare, the theoretical existence of a 1946 wheat penny paired with an incorrect reverse or experimental die would rewrite numismatic history and instantly become one of the most famous coins ever known. Condition plays a critical role as well, because even the rarest error loses some appeal if it is heavily worn or damaged. But when an error coin survives in pristine, uncirculated, or even proof-like condition with original mint luster intact, it becomes a perfect storm of rarity, preservation, and visual impact, the kind of coin that elite collectors, museums, and investors would pursue regardless of cost. The post-war period also saw the reuse of older dies and hubs that were nearing the end of their service life, increasing the likelihood of cracks, cuds, and retained die breaks, where chunks of the die break away and leave raised blobs or dramatic distortions on the coin surface, and large, well-placed cuds on Lincoln's portrait or the wheat ears are especially dramatic and can significantly elevate value, particularly if they are unique to a single die state. Another intriguing factor is the possibility of repunched mint marks or overmint marks, because although mint mark practices were changing during this period, any unusual placement, doubling, or overlapping of mint marks adds another layer of complexity and rarity that specialists love to study and catalog. Beyond the technical aspects, the story and mystique surrounding a coin can amplify its value, and the idea that a humble 1946 wheat penny could be hiding in an old jar, inherited collection, or forgotten drawer fuels constant interest, because numismatics is as much about discovery and narrative as it is about metal and numbers. When a coin is linked to a specific historical moment, such as the immediate aftermath of World War II, it carries emotional weight and symbolic significance, representing a nation transitioning from conflict to prosperity, and collectors often pay premiums for coins that capture these turning points in tangible form. The $95 million valuation is not something that applies to every 1946 wheat penny, but rather to the most extraordinary theoretical or privately rumored examples that combine multiple high-level errors, unique compositions, and exceptional preservation, the kind of coin that would headline auctions, appear on magazine covers, and become the centerpiece of legendary collections. It is important to understand that numismatic value at this level is driven by competition among ultra-high-end collectors and institutions, where price becomes secondary to ownership and prestige, and when two or more determined buyers want the same unique piece, the final number can soar far beyond traditional expectations. This is why experts stress the importance of careful examination, authentication, and professional grading, because only certified, well-documented examples can command such staggering sums, and any potential discovery must be handled with caution to avoid damage or loss of provenance. The allure of the 1946 wheat penny lies not just in the money but in the idea that history still hides secrets in plain sight, that something minted by the millions could contain within it a tiny fraction that defies all odds and becomes priceless, and that anyone with curiosity and patience could one day stumble upon such a treasure. Every scratch, letter, and millimeter of a coin tells a story, and when those details reveal mistakes made decades ago by hurried hands and aging machines, they transform into clues that lead collectors down paths of research, debate, and excitement. The possibility that a single cent could rival the value of fine art or rare gems challenges our assumptions about worth and reminds us that value is created by rarity, demand, and story, not face value. As collectors continue to search rolls, estates, and collections, the legend of the $95 million 1946 wheat penny endures, inspiring both seasoned numismatists and newcomers alike to look closer at what they hold, because sometimes the smallest objects carry the biggest surprises, and in the world of coin collecting, the next great discovery could be hiding in the most ordinary place, waiting for someone with a keen eye and a passion for history to recognize its true potential and change their life forever. Next, 1945 wheat penny. Thank you for tuning in to the channel where everyday objects can turn into unbelievable treasures. Because today we are diving into one of the most fascinating and talked about stories in the world of rare coins. The legendary 1945 wheat penny that has been rumored, debated, analyzed, and dreamed about by collectors around the globe. A coin that in some stories carries an eye-watering value of $67 million. Not because it is made of gold or diamonds, but because of a perfect storm of errors, minting mistakes, historical timing, and extreme rarity that, if proven authentic and paired with the right circumstances, could push a simple 1-cent coin into the realm of life-changing wealth. And to understand why people even talk about such a number, we have to go back to the moment this penny was born, right at the end of World War II, when the United States Mint was under enormous pressure to produce massive quantities of coins quickly as the nation shifted from wartime to peacetime production, a time when speed often mattered more than perfection, and when small mistakes could slip through unnoticed, mistakes that today define the difference between pocket change and a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. Because the standard 1945 wheat penny was supposed to be struck in a bronze alloy made primarily of copper with small amounts of tin and zinc, featuring Abraham Lincoln on the front and the iconic wheat ears on the back. Yet during this chaotic period, leftover materials, worn dies, experimental processes, and human error created opportunities for coins that simply should not exist. And among the most valuable possibilities tied to the 1945 date are off-metal errors, transitional planchet mistakes, double dies, dramatic die breaks, wrong metal strikes, and ultra-rare proof or pattern anomalies, each of which can multiply a coin's value exponentially when combined. And one of the most sensational theories centers on the idea of a 1945 penny struck on a steel planchet, a leftover from the wartime steel cents of 1943, because although steel was officially phased out after that year, blank steel planchets could have remained in hoppers or bins and accidentally fed into the presses in 1945, producing a coin that visually appears silver gray, is magnetic, and instantly stands out from normal copper cents. And while even a single confirmed steel cent from a year it was never intended to exist can command enormous sums, the value skyrockets. Further, if the coin also displays additional errors, like a double die obverse where Lincoln's date, motto, or profile appears distinctly doubled due to a misaligned die hubbing process, a mistake that can never be replicated and is frozen in time on every coin struck from that die, and collectors place massive premiums on such pieces because they represent a unique mechanical failure rather than damage. And then, there are wrong-planchet errors involving bronze compositions that do not match official mint records, such as a 1945 penny struck on a foreign coin blank, a brass alloy intended for another denomination, or even an experimental alloy tested quietly by the mint during post-war adjustments. And while documentation of such experiments is often incomplete or lost, authenticated examples have stunned the numismatic world before, especially when metallurgical analysis reveals a composition that should not exist for that year, pushing the coin into legendary status. And when people speak of a $67 million valuation, it is usually not about a single minor flaw but a hypothetical convergence of multiple extraordinary characteristics, such as a 1945 penny struck on an off-metal planchet, showing strong double die features, perfectly centered strikes, pristine preservation, and confirmed originality, all wrapped in a compelling historical narrative tied to the end of the war and the mint's transition period, and condition plays an equally critical role, because a coin with even the rarest error can lose enormous value if it shows heavy wear, corrosion, or damage, while one preserved in near-perfect mint state with sharp details, original luster, and no cleaning can multiply in value many times over, especially when third-party grading services certify it at the highest levels and confirm the error beyond any doubt. And then, there is the possibility of a mule error, where mismatched dies were accidentally paired, such as a wheat reverse. combined with an obverse die not intended for that year, a mistake that requires multiple failures in quality control and is therefore astonishingly rare. But if such a mule-dated 1945 were discovered, especially with unique die markers, it could become one of the most important Lincoln cents ever known, and beyond physical errors, provenance and story matter deeply in the high-end collector market, because a coin that can be traced back to an original source, such as a mint employee estate, a long-forgotten roll discovered in an attic, or a collection assembled decades before the coin's significance was understood, carries a level of authenticity and intrigue that fuels bidding wars among elite collectors, museums, and investors who are not just buying metal but owning a piece of American history. And the idea of a $67 million price tag often reflects a perfect storm scenario where 2 or 3 ultra-wealthy collectors compete for the same once-in-a-generation coin, driving the price far beyond traditional price guides, similar to how famous artworks or rare baseball cards have shattered expectations. And while skeptics rightly point out that no publicly recorded sale has definitively confirmed such a figure for a 1945 wheat penny, the numismatic market has seen private transactions kept confidential, and valuations are often discussed in theoretical terms based on precedent, rarity, and demand, meaning that if the right coin surfaced tomorrow with ironclad authentication, it could reset the record books entirely. And this is why experts always stress the importance of not dismissing old pennies too quickly, because subtle clues like unusual color, unexpected weight, magnetic attraction, misaligned details, or doubled lettering can indicate something extraordinary hiding in plain sight, and even mistakes that seem small to the untrained eye, such as slightly rotated dies or minor off-center strikes, can become immensely valuable when combined with the right date and composition. And for 1945 specifically, the historical context amplifies everything, because it marks the end of a global conflict, the return to normal minting operations, and a period of transition where errors were statistically more likely, yet still rare enough to make survivors almost mythical. And collectors are drawn to that moment in time because it represents both an ending and a beginning, frozen into a piece of metal small enough to fit in your palm. And while the vast majority of 1945 wheat pennies are worth only a few cents to a few dollars depending on condition, the existence of even one extraordinary outlier keeps the dream alive for millions of people who check their change, search through inherited collections, or hold onto old rolls passed down through generations. And it is this combination of history, mystery, human error, and the tantalizing possibility of unimaginable value that makes the story of the 1945 wheat penny so powerful, because it reminds us that sometimes the most valuable treasures are not locked in vaults or displayed in museums, but quietly waiting to be recognized. And whether the $67 million figure remains a rumor, a theoretical ceiling, or a future headline, the fascination it inspires continues to fuel curiosity, education, and excitement in the hobby. And that is why stories like this matter, because they turn ordinary objects into gateways to history and imagination, and they invite every viewer to ask a simple but thrilling question the next time they see a penny. What if this one is different? What if this one is the mistake that changed everything? Next, 1953 D wheat penny. If you love unbelievable stories hidden in everyday pocket change, and you're fascinated by how tiny minting mistakes can turn ordinary coins into once-in-a-lifetime treasures, you're in exactly the right place. Because today we're diving into one of the most talked about and debated legends in American numismatics. The idea that a 1953 D Lincoln wheat penny could be worth as much as $42 million due to a rare combination of errors, mistakes, and extraordinary circumstances. And while examples at that exact price are often discussed as theoretical or rumored rather than publicly confirmed sales, the story itself is rooted in very real minting processes, genuine historical errors, and the way collectors assign staggering value when multiple rare factors collide in a single coin. So let's break down why a humble copper cent from the Denver Mint could ever be imagined as worth more than mansions, supercars, and priceless works of art, starting with the context of the year itself, because 1953 sits at an interesting moment in U.S. coinage history, just before major changes in mint technology, quality control, and composition standards, meaning the systems in place were still vulnerable to mistakes that modern mints almost never allow. And when we talk about a 1953 D wheat penny, the D mint mark already narrows the field significantly, since Denver production runs differed slightly from Philadelphia and San Francisco, with different dyes, different dye life cycles, and different inspection routines, all of which open the door to unique errors, one of the most valuable being a double dye obverse or reverse, where the design elements such as Lincoln's profile, the date, or the inscriptions appear doubled due to a misalignment during the dye creation process. And while minor doubling is relatively common and usually worth only a modest premium, a strong, dramatic double dye with crisp separation can skyrocket in value, especially if it went unnoticed and entered circulation. And when you combine that with a potential repunched mint mark, which occurred frequently in the era when mint marks were punched into dies by hand, you suddenly have a coin with multiple layers of rarity, and collectors place enormous premiums on pieces that clearly show the D mint mark punched more than once at slightly different angles or positions, because each repunch is essentially a fingerprint of human error frozen in metal. And then there's the possibility of a wrong-planchet error, one of the most powerful value drivers in all of numismatics, where a penny is accidentally struck on a blank intended for another denomination or even another metal entirely, such as bronze alloy inconsistencies, experimental planchets, or transitional metal blanks left over from test runs. And while 1953 is not a famous transition year like 1943 or 1944, the mint still experimented constantly behind the scenes, and a 1953 D penny struck on an off-metal planchet, especially one confirmed by metallurgical analysis, would instantly become a unique or near-unique artifact, pushing theoretical valuations into the millions, particularly if the coin also retained sharp detail and minimal wear, because condition multiplies value exponentially in the high-end collector market. And speaking of condition, one of the biggest reasons the $42 million figure even enters the conversation is the idea of a perfect storm coin, a specimen that not only has multiple dramatic errors, but also survives in pristine, mint-state condition with full original luster, red copper surfaces, and no signs of cleaning or damage, which is incredibly unlikely given that most error coins were spent, handled, and circulated before anyone realized their importance. So if a 1953 D wheat penny with a major double die, a repunched mint mark, and an off-metal strike were somehow preserved in a mint worker's drawer or a forgotten bank roll for decades, its uniqueness would place it in a category where traditional price guides no longer apply, and instead private negotiations between elite collectors, museums, and investors determine value. And those negotiations can reach numbers that sound unreal to the average person, because at that level buyers are not just purchasing a coin, they're buying the right to own a piece of history that may never be available again. And another critical factor often discussed is a dramatic die break or cud error, where part of the die cracks or breaks away, leaving a raised blob of metal on the finished coin. And while small die cracks are common, massive, visually striking cuds that distort Lincoln's portrait or obscure parts of the design are extremely rare, and when paired with other errors, they create a coin that tells a vivid story of a die literally failing under pressure. And collectors love coins that clearly show the stress and chaos of the minting process, because they offer a glimpse behind the curtain of mass production. And then there's the possibility of a mule error, one of the rarest and most valuable mistakes in U.S. coinage, where two mismatched dies are paired together, such as a wheat penny obverse with an unexpected reverse design. And while no publicly documented 1953 D penny mule has been confirmed, the mere possibility fuels speculation. because mule errors have sold for extraordinary sums when they surface, and if such a coin were ever authenticated from the Denver Mint, its value would be virtually incalculable, especially if it challenged or rewrote established numismatic records, and authentication itself plays a massive role in why a coin could command $42 million, because top-tier grading services don't just evaluate condition, they verify composition, strike characteristics, die markers, and historical plausibility. And a coin that passes every test and still presents previously unknown features becomes headline news in the collecting world, attracting attention far beyond hobby circles into mainstream media, which further drives demand, and demand is the final, often overlooked piece of the puzzle, because value is not just about rarity, it's about how many people want something and how badly they want it, and Lincoln Wheat Pennies occupy a special place in American culture, being instantly recognizable, widely collected, and emotionally tied to history, meaning a legendary error set captures imagination in a way that an obscure, ancient coin might not. And when wealthy collectors compete for an iconic piece tied to a beloved design, bidding wars can erupt, pushing theoretical values into the tens of millions, especially if the coin is positioned as the ultimate wheat penny, the one example that stands above all others. And stories also circulate about coins with ghost images, where remnants of previous strikes or clashed dies leave faint outlines of other design elements on the surface, adding yet another layer of intrigue. And while some of these features require magnification and expert knowledge to appreciate, high-end collectors often prize complexity, seeing each anomaly as another chapter in the coin story, and that storytelling aspect is crucial because a $42 million valuation is as much about narrative as it is about metal and minting, with every error, mistake, and irregularity combining into a legend that can be marketed, exhibited, and remembered, and even skeptics who doubt such a price acknowledge that if a 1953 D wheat penny were discovered with a previously unknown error type, confirmed mint documentation, flawless preservation, and a clear chain of custody, it could redefine what collectors believe a small copper cent is capable of being worth. And that's why people still check old jars, inherited collections, and estate boxes, because while the odds are astronomically small, the payoff is unimaginably large, and the idea that something so ordinary could hide such extraordinary value keeps the hunt alive, turning every wheat penny into a potential ticket to numismatic immortality. And whether or not a $42 million 1953 D wheat penny ever changes hands publicly, the discussion itself highlights how errors, mistakes, and possibilities transform coins from pocket change into priceless artifacts, reminding us that history often hides in the smallest details, waiting for the right set of eyes to recognize its worth. Next, 1951 Wheat Penny. I'm excited you're here today because we're diving into one of the most talked about and controversial stories in the coin collecting world, a story that blends history, mystery, extreme rarity, and the dream that pocket change could secretly be worth life-changing money. And that is the legend of the 1951 wheat penny that some collectors believe could reach an astonishing value of up to $30 million under the rarest circumstances. And while that number sparks debate, skepticism, and excitement, the reason this penny has captured so much attention comes down to the fascinating combination of errors, mistakes, minting anomalies, historical context, and what-if scenarios that drive high-end numismatic values. The 1951 wheat penny was struck during the final era of the Lincoln Wheat Cent series, which ran from 1909 to 1958. And by 1951 the United States Mint was producing massive quantities of cents using well-established processes, which makes the idea of a major error surviving quality control both unlikely and incredibly intriguing. In a normal state, a 1951 wheat penny is common and typically worth only a few cents to a few dollars depending on condition, but the story changes completely when extreme mint errors enter the picture. One of the most valuable possibilities discussed among collectors is a wrong-planchet error, which would mean the penny was struck on a metal blank intended for another coin, such as silver, brass, or even a leftover experimental alloy. If a genuine 1951 wheat penny were discovered struck on a silver planchet or an undocumented alloy, authenticated by top grading services, and confirmed to be unique or one of only a few known examples, the value could skyrocket into the millions due to its historical importance and singular nature. Another massive value driver is a double die error, where the coin shows dramatic doubling in the date, lettering, or Lincoln's profile due to a misaligned die during the hubbing process. While the famous double die cents are usually associated with 1955, a previously unknown 1951 double die with extreme, visible doubling could ignite enormous demand, especially if it displayed bold separation and strong clarity across multiple design elements. Collectors pay staggering sums for coins that combine rarity, visual impact, and a compelling backstory, and a newly discovered major double die for 1951 would check all of those boxes. There is also speculation around transitional metal errors, which occur when the mint is experimenting with or transitioning between metal compositions. Although the official copper composition remained stable in 1951, history shows that test planchets and experimental blanks sometimes remained in mint facilities, and if a 1951 wheat penny were struck on a transitional or experimental metal and accidentally released, it would represent a previously undocumented chapter of mint history, dramatically increasing its desirability and value. Die cap errors, where a coin sticks to a die and strikes subsequent coins creating a bottle cap shape, are another possibility, but for a 1951 wheat penny to reach extreme valuation levels, the error would need to be exceptionally well preserved, clearly dated, and unique in form. Off-metal strikes combined with other errors, known as compound errors, can push values even higher, especially when they defy known minting norms. Another scenario involves a proof or presentation strike that was never officially recorded. Proof pennies from 1951 are not supposed to exist, as proof production for cents was suspended during certain years. So if a true proof like 1951 wheat penny surfaced with mirrored fields, sharp strikes, and full documentation proving it was struck intentionally or experimentally, it would challenge established numismatic records and command immense interest from elite collectors and institutions. Condition also plays a crucial role, because even the rarest error loses value if it is damaged or heavily worn. A mint state or proof-like example with blazing original surfaces, no cleaning, and strong eye appeal could multiply the value exponentially. Authentication is the cornerstone of such a valuation, because without certification from top-tier grading services and verification by multiple experts, extraordinary claims remain just stories. The $30 million figure often discussed represents the upper boundary of what could happen if multiple rarity factors converge, including uniqueness, historical significance, perfect preservation, and intense competition among wealthy collectors or museums seeking to own a once-in-a-lifetime artifact. Market psychology also matters, as coins have sold for record-breaking prices not just because of metal or age, but because of the narrative they carry. A 1951 wheat penny that rewrites part of U.S. mint history would become more than a coin. It would be a symbol of discovery and chance. Errors like missing mint marks, while common in some years, could add to the intrigue if combined with other anomalies. Die cracks, cuds, and retained breaks usually add modest value, but if a 1951 set exhibited an extreme, visually stunning break that altered the design in a dramatic way, collectors might view it as a masterpiece of mint error art. There is also discussion around needle errors, where mismatched dies are used, such as pairing a wheat reverse with an unintended obverse design, and while no confirmed examples exist for 1951, the hypothetical discovery of such a coin would send shockwaves through the hobby. The fascination with the 1951 wheat penny is fueled by the idea that not all mint records are complete, and that human error has always played a role in production, leaving room for unknown rarities to surface decades later. Stories of coins discovered in old collections, inherited jars, or forgotten bank rolls keep collectors searching, because history shows that major discoveries can happen long after a coin's release. While skepticism is healthy, the excitement surrounding these possibilities keeps the legend alive and encourages careful examination of even the most ordinary-looking pennies. Ultimately, the reason a 1951 wheat penny is discussed in the same breath as multi-million-dollar coins is not because every example is valuable, but because under the rarest and most extraordinary conditions, involving severe mint errors, experimental strikes, perfect preservation, and undeniable authenticity, it could theoretically reach a level of value that seems unbelievable. This blend of history, mystery, rarity, and the human element of error is what makes coin collecting so captivating, and it's why stories like the 1951 wheat penny continue to spark curiosity, debate, and hope among collectors and viewers alike, reminding us that sometimes the smallest objects can carry the biggest stories. Last 1952 wheat penny. Thanks for tuning in to the channel. Today we're diving into one of the most talked about and controversial legends in American coin collecting, a story that continues to captivate collectors, investors, and everyday people who still check their pocket change just in case, because according to long-running rumors and speculative discussions in the numismatic world, a 1952 wheat penny could theoretically be worth as much as $35 million if it exists with the right combination of rare errors, minting mistakes, historical context, and near-perfect preservation. And while no verified public sale at that exact figure has ever been officially confirmed, the fascination comes from understanding how a humble 1-cent coin struck in Denver during the early 1950s could even be discussed in the same sentence as 8-figure values. And it all begins with the era in which the coin was made. Because 1952 was a transitional time for the United States Mint, with post-World War II production pressures, aging machinery, and massive output demands that created conditions where errors were more likely to slip through unnoticed, especially at branch mints like Denver, where millions upon millions of wheat cents were produced using steel-hardened dies that were often overused, repolished, or improperly aligned. And when collectors talk about a hypothetical 1952 wheat penny reaching a $35 million valuation, they're not talking about a normal circulated coin but rather a once-in-a-lifetime specimen combining multiple extreme anomalies that would defy probability, beginning with the possibility of an off-metal strike, which is one of the most important factors, because if a 1952 penny were mistakenly struck on a planchet intended for a different denomination or composition, such as a silver dime planchet, a copper-nickel experimental alloy, or even a leftover wartime steel or transitional brass blank, the coin would instantly become one of the rarest. Mint errors in U.S. history, and rarity is the foundation of value, but rarity alone isn't enough, because the error would also need to be authenticated, perfectly preserved, and clearly tied to official mint operations rather than post-mint tampering and beyond off-metal strikes. Collectors speculate about the potential for a unique double die obverse or reverse, so dramatic that it rivals or exceeds famous varieties like the 1955 double die, but with even more extreme separation visible on Lincoln's portrait, the date, and the inscriptions, creating a visual effect so bold and unmistakable that it would instantly become the most dramatic double die ever discovered, especially if the doubling resulted from a rare class of hub misalignment combined with multiple impressions during die creation. And then there's the possibility of a wrong mint error, which is another factor that fuels these legendary valuations. Because if a 1952 penny carried a mint mark but was actually struck using dies intended for a different mint, or featured a repunched or inverted mint mark that clearly demonstrated a breakdown in mint mark application procedures, the coin would represent a documented failure in quality control at a time when mint marks were still manually punched into dies, and manual processes always leave room for human error. And speaking of human error, die breaks, retained cuds, and massive die cracks are also part of the discussion, because a coin that shows a spectacular retained cut across Lincoln's portrait or an interior die break that creates a raised island of metal would already be highly desirable. But when combined with other errors on the same coin, the value escalates exponentially rather than incrementally, and that's how theoretical valuations reach into the millions. Because numismatics isn't about adding values together, it's about compounding uniqueness. And another aspect that makes the $35 million speculation persist is the concept of a one-of-one discovery, meaning a coin with a combination of errors so specific and so unlikely that no second example could ever be produced, even intentionally, and if such a coin were also preserved in pristine mint state, perhaps graded at the highest levels with full original luster, razor-sharp strike details, and zero post-mint damage, the grading alone would place it among the finest known wheat cents of any year, and condition is critical because a rare error in poor condition loses much of its appeal, whereas a flawless error becomes legendary. And then there's the intriguing idea of experimental strikes, because the U.S. Mint has a long history of quietly testing metals, alloys, and die treatments, sometimes without formal documentation. And if a 1952 D penny were proven to be an undocumented experimental strike using a non-standard alloy intended for future coinage, that alone could elevate it into the highest tier of numismatic artifacts, comparable to pattern coins that already command millions, and collectors are drawn to these mysteries because they blend hard science with historical detective work, and the value discussion also includes provenance. Because if such a coin were discovered in an original roll, a sealed mint bag, or an old family estate with documentation tracing it back to the 1950s, that uninterrupted chain of ownership would add enormous credibility and desirability, and provenance matters because it reduces doubt, increases confidence among buyers, and transforms a coin into a historical object rather than just a collectible. And beyond physical characteristics, the cultural and psychological aspects play a role too, because the Wheat Penny series is one of the most beloved in American coinage, widely collected by beginners and experts alike, which means any record-breaking discovery within the series would attract unprecedented attention from museums, private collectors, and institutional investors, driving competitive bidding to extraordinary levels. And when people hear a figure like $35 million attached to a penny, what they're really hearing is the potential outcome of a perfect storm, where rarity, error severity, historical context, flawless condition, authentication, and public fascination all collide at once. And it's important to understand that values at this level are not determined by metal content or face value, but by storytelling backed by physical evidence. Because the most valuable coins in the world are the ones that rewrite what we thought was possible, and the reason the 1952 D Wheat Penny remains such a powerful topic is that it sits at the intersection of plausibility and imagination. Since we know massive errors happened, we know undocumented varieties still get discovered decades later, and we know that single coins have sold for sums that once seemed absurd. And so the idea persists that somewhere, maybe in a forgotten collection, a bank vault, or a jar that hasn't been opened in generations, there could be a 1952 D Wheat Penny bearing an impossible combination of minting mistakes that turns it into the most valuable one-cent piece ever conceived. And whether or not a $35 million example ever surfaces, the story itself fuels curiosity, education, and excitement in the hobby, reminding everyone that even the smallest objects can carry enormous value when history, error, and rarity align in just the right way, and that's why people keep looking, keep learning, and keep believing that the next great discovery could be hiding in plain sight.